seconded by Mike, to approve our minutes from the previous meeting. And if there are no questions, all in favor of approving, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Thank you. We have an approval of our minutes, and the vouchers are next. If you want to look at them quickly, Diamond typically moves to approve these. Diamond can't join us tonight, so somebody's going to jump up and fill that in for us if we would.
I'll make a motion to approve Fund 10 vouchers totaling $192,455.02 as presented.
I'll second.
Thank you. Motion from Mike, and I missed the second. Who did that?
That was Rick.
That was Rick. Okay, just for Kim's posterity. So if there are no questions on the vouchers, all in favor of approving signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? The vouchers are approved. Okay, public participation. Here again, you will have to help me a little bit. Are there anyone signed up that are there in person?
Yes, there are.
Okay.
We just take them in the order that they're signed up here.
Yes, that's what we like to do typically.
First is Bill Moss. He has decided to pass. So next is Heather Moore.
Provide documents. If you could take one, please pass it. Not letting me turn off. Yeah, or turn it off. There you go. Okay. Hi, members of the school board. I have sent copies around to you. I have also emailed you guys today regarding my current issue. I've met with Mr. Dahmen a couple of times trying to understand why my little itty bitty subdivision in the middle of farm fields is being eliminated in the consolidated zone. And I keep getting a what if? What if houses turn over? What if there's more building going on? I can tell you right now, the farmers that are around me are 4th, 5th, even some 6th generation farmers. They're not going to be selling their farms. Included in those documents is a full map of the school zones. You can see highlighted on there State Highway 51. With Highway 51, anything west of there should theoretically be part of the consolidated school zone. If you look even further into the zoomed in map, which is page number 2, you will see that little green dot that's right there in the middle of no man's land, which is where I live. You can see that that one little itty bitty area, which is surrounded by cornfields or hayfields, or I think we even have a little bit of a soybean field close by as well, that there is nothing around my little subdivision. However, in my 2-road subdivision with 14 homes, the administration feels that it's necessary to make that part of West and bus these children close to an hour to West, when it's 2.9 miles to consolidated school zone, and I don't even have to go onto a major highway or even cross a major highway. Also included in there are some communication emails that I had sent to the superintendent. The first one on there is regarding the $80 million additional funding that K-12 and higher education schools will be getting from the Evers administration with regards to the CARES Act and communications between myself and the superintendent regarding my questions on the appeals process. Part of that appeals process is that in one of those emails, I'm told that my children, once they are placed and we win our appeal to keep our kids in the consolidated school zone, that I then would not have to go through the appeals process. The next round of emails that you see in there is from the superintendent from Friday when I was questioning about the school boundaries with regards to consolidated zone. In there, it states that I now have to appeal every year to keep my kids in the elementary school that they are currently at. I asked that the board take into consideration, including the Tocoho Timber subdivision, which only has 4 homes that have elementary age students. Within a year, there will only be 2 homes in that subdivision with elementary age school or students in there. And to my knowledge, there is no other young families in my neighborhood since there's no houses for sale right now. I also asked that with the appeals process, you make this a one and done. Let us appeal, make our appeal, and know that our kids are going to stay in that school for the remainder of their K-3 experience. So that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. And
On the main page, Kim, the event calendar on the main page, not your board docs page. Right, I didn't put that in there. I put up the agenda for that.
Dan, you can go ahead.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Once again, good evening. Thank you again for being here. Thank you again for giving us the opportunity to try to talk with you some of our concerns for the boundaries. I did get the update on Friday at 4:45 saying that our road will be added to the consolidated school, being that we're 1 mile away. So I do thank you for that. And I appreciate your willingness to hear us out and to understand exactly what my concern was for the boundaries change. I'm here partly to say thank you for that, but I'm also here to support the entire school district. Instead of just considering my children are a minority, I think all the children in the school district have a voice, and it's important to try to make this the best opportunity that we can. I do appreciate through my correspondence with you, you guys did acknowledge that maybe this could have been done better. I do appreciate the listening session that we had. I think a lot of positive came out of that, but I don't feel that the updates we were sent on Friday really had much of a change besides our one school road. I think a lot of people may not have supported the referendum if they knew that this change was coming. I think there could have been more transparency, and I think we could have worked this solution out better. I ask you to consider to have additional transparency in the future because I know an additional referendum will be coming. The current one is only a Band-Aid over the issues that we have, and I think it's very important for the school board and for the district to continue to increase district support rather than doing the exact opposite and not working with the community or the parents. The Moore family just spoke about their address. I also support their request. I think that you should. They are 2 miles away from our house, still 3 to 4 miles within the consolidated area. Consider extending that boundary north of Consolidated School. you can what if any subdivision, and in comparison, the Harmony Grove subdivision, if you've driven it and if you've acknowledged it, it is a highly populated residential neighborhood. If anything, has more of an opportunity for more children to be born and more children going to consolidated school. As I preached and talked about in the previous times that we've talked about this, that whole surrounding area in that neighborhood is already west, but you've made the change to take it over Consolidated Elementary, and apparently that's going to stay. I understand the committee or the group was given an additional or a very difficult task of moving these boundaries around. Just please be considered, I'm sure you are, but the only area of growth in Rock County is mainly the Milton area, especially around the 26 area. That's where a lot of the residential roads, or excuse me, lots and homes are being built. I'm sure you're considering the future growth and should be considering an additional elementary or even adding on to Consolidated to accommodate more growth. So in the future, I guess I just ask that you try to be a little more transparent. Try to get some of the feedback from the community. If this has truly been in the works since last fall, please give the community more than 2 months to try to accommodate the changes that you are requesting. So once again, thank you for what you do. Thank you for hearing us out. And hopefully in the future, we can try to work together better to come up with a better solution for everyone. Thank you.
Next is Jim Moore.
All right, thank you for taking the time and adjusting the boundary lines. However, there's still some more work that needs to be done. We live in Tocoho Timber Subdivision, a rural subdivision that was created in the 1970s. We bought our house in 2011. Previous owners' kids all went to Consolidated. There were no elementary kids in the neighborhood at that time. A couple of years later, there's elementary kids in our neighborhood. Up until 2014, 2015, I knew of kids on the other side of the block that went to Consolidated. Not sure when this changed. But after my oldest completed his 4K year in 2017, 2018, he was placed at West. We challenged it at that time and were told in writing from school administrators that he would be at Consolidated throughout his entire elementary career, and his younger sibling would be placed there as well. At the time in 2018, we also questioned a map. We were told that there were no elementary boundary line maps, just a district-wide map. Anyways, back to where I live. We are west of Highway 51 and west of Consolidated School Road. The green dot on the map my wife provided shows exactly where we live. You walk out my back door, 20 yards into the woods and farm field behind me, crossing the property line, you're in Edgerton School District. All the land around us is owned by 4th, 5th, 6th generation farmers. It's not going to be developed in our lifetime, not even our kids' lifetime, not even our grandkids' lifetimes. The subdivision has historically gone to Consolidated, and to not include this 2-road rural subdivision in the Consolidated zone makes no sense. Our subdivision currently has 4 dots on the map, 2 of which are currently going to Consolidated, 2 are going to West. After this next school year, I know for a fact 2 of these dots will be eliminated. There will be, if not 3 of them, 3 of the 4 dots, leaving just my family's 1 dot on the map. This isn't your problem area for elementary attendance. It's newer subdivisions east of Highway 51, especially east of Newville Road, like the Harmony Grove subdivision, which Dan just touched on, which we're currently going to West, which I think they should stay at West because it's mass houses in there. It's 15 roads, houses on top of houses. More opportunity for growth and kids to be moving into that neighborhood. The first half of my son's 4K school year, we used our address as our bus stop. The bus took 50 minutes to get him to Small Wonders on average each day, if not longer. The first school stop on that bus route was dropping at West. It took 40 minutes from our house to get to West. It's a very long time for elementary kids to ride a bus. I do not see how this long bus ride from our neighborhood even makes sense. I know one of the families in our neighborhood going to West drives their kids to school each day because they don't like the long bus ride. Yes, we do not use our home address as our bus stop. My kids get on at our child care provider's house, which is a half mile from Consolidated School. Now, if you're telling us if we don't win our appeal, my kids win our appeal to keep my kids at Consolidated, they will either be forced to go to West, in which they still have to get on my child care provider's house, ride the bus from there to Consolidated, get off the bus, only to see their former classmates and teachers, and then be forced to hop on a transfer bus to go to West, another 30-minute drive. This literally would be rubbing this decision in my kids' faces every day. Not to mention the long bus ride they'd have as well. I do not want to be appealing this with the school every year. This should be a one-time appeals process and grandfather the kids into their current schools. I know the district saw the growth in this area coming and literally did nothing about it until now. And you wonder why the referendum in the Consolidated School area failed twice before it passed. Had you put an addition on Consolidated, making it 2 classrooms per grade, which I suggested to board members when I saw them in person back when they were trying to push the referendum through the first couple times, this wouldn't even be an issue that we're discussing right now. You say you want to be transparent, but this whole ordeal that you're putting everyone through right now is far from transparent. Now, you can either work with us or against us. The choice is yours. All I'm asking is you to reconsider the boundary lines to include everything west of Highway 51, especially everything west of Consolidated School Road into the Consolidated Elementary area. There is no reason elementary kids should be crossing a state highway to get to school, especially when they're west of Consolidated School Road like we are. We live west of Consolidated, west of 51, or even further west of Consolidated, one little subdivision, 16 houses. You're not going to see a turnover in our subdivision. Been there since 2011. There hasn't hardly been any turnover. It's a handful of houses have gone up for sale. Every 2 to 3 years, you see a house go for sale. You might get 1 or 2 kids. Thank you for your time.
Do we have more folks, Rich?
Next is Ryan Sukavchik. Ryan Suhanik.
Grew up on Bowers Lake Road. I've been in this Milton district my entire life. And I now live in Edgerton. I'm the motorcycle stunt rider. I have a Guinness World Record, blah, blah, blah. Should know how to say my name. First of all, it's pretty hard to explain to a 7-year-old that he has to change his friends every other year. And I'm getting pretty tired of it. Like everybody, pay a ton of money in taxes. I want my kid to be happy. That's the most important thing. And I don't understand why you would implement new rules on students that are already in the school district going through it. Well, hey, you gotta change your friends this year. Next year, you gotta change your friends back to the friends that you had before because you have to go to a new school. I'm gonna make this short, but you guys really gotta look into it. Like, why would we not implement rules on the new generations that don't have friends already established in schools? What's the point? I simply do not understand this. Like, we're talking 7-year-olds, 6-year-olds, they don't understand. And that's gonna create years of animosity for you guys in the future. Or when my kid's standing up talking to you guys.
Next is Katie Schwebs.
As many parents here or in the community in the surrounding areas, you definitely guys can see that voices are needing to be heard. Frustrations are kind of at an all-time high. It's hard to kind of come up here and speak about things when this is the first time I've heard that this has maybe been in the agenda since the fall time area. We do live in an area that is up and coming, but I also truly feel at this point in time, the kids that are already a part of the school district children that have already been accepted, regardless of what school that they're at. That's where they're established. That's where we originate our work times, our drop-offs, our pickup times, our daycares. And you can fill in the blank of everything else that comes in between. Yes, updates have to happen. Change have to come with time. My dad has been a superintendent of other schools out in other states his entire life, so I kind of know the idea of these concepts. These types of things can be hard. Changes can be challenging. You're not going to please everybody. It's really hard to hear everyone's voices and everyone's concerns. So thank you for letting us come up here and say these things. So understand that some of the frustrations are definitely important. The unclearness behind all this is probably the most frustrating. Not knowing that changes are coming to this big of a degree, maybe approaching this and saying, hey, there's zones that are changing, things are gonna be happening. The community, like some were saying, you know, taxes are being paid, that's being done. Not everyone knows how to voice their concerns. Coming up here and speaking with everyone and not knowing until probably tonight that this could be happening, it's hard to get a full-blown plan of some form of persuasive speech that we should have to bring to you guys. So shifting and moving forward, absolutely, is a good idea. Were things not working? Probably not. Do things need to change? Absolutely. But there's also a way to deliver the message. A way you guys can deliver the message is maybe putting a letter out saying, hey, there's some changes that could be happening. There's some zones that are changing. You may be in an effective area. You may not have busing for your children. When we bought our house in 2010, we were told that the buses would come to our house, not from the district. That's not what I'm saying there. But we were told that depending on where our children went, the school buses would come there. We were already driving our oldest daughter, who has already been through your guys' district. She is now in the Navy and she's graduated. So we've been part of this district since she was in 4th grade. Now my youngest is going to go into 2nd grade. Yes, kids they're more adaptable than anybody. So yes, change is okay. However, I think it's how this happened, how abruptly this happened. You guys could have easily stated in a letter that this is going to be changing, you'll be affected. If you have any questions or concerns back and forth, when maybe this concept was happening, voices could have been heard a little bit easier and smoother. And I kind of feel like regardless of, all these children are part of your school district. They've already been in your classes. They've already, well, not in your classes, but you know what I mean. They've been part of the community, right? So I truly feel once they're accepted into your guys' schools, they're part of a community, regardless of the location, which is a big deal. So I totally understand what you guys are saying with that. All children matter with this. Not one is untouched. The expansion of homes are going to happen with time coming in again. Our area, it just ignited with, I don't know, I want to say at least 100 houses total since I've moved into the area. I was curious also when buildings go up and houses go up and subdivisions expand, do these building contractors reach out to schools and say, hey, can you even have enough room for these children that potentially can be coming in? And I feel that's where communication is lost as well. Now, when also children are chosen for school of choice, I look at that as not a legal contract, but I look at it as a contract of, yes, we will accept your child into that school. They're going to be placed here. I know many families where at one point in time they were put at Milton East or Milton West, and they keep getting changed back and forth. It's very hard on families and their financial followings with that. So yes, change can happen, but I also feel the lack of communication is the #1 reason why so many people are upset. And I really know that this one would have been a lot more full with some questions that wanted to be asked, but we really don't know where to go to get a really point blank answer. And I'm not sure if you guys know those answers yet. By making this big of a change to an entire community, this could have been done a lot more smoothly with some better answers. Thank you.
There is no one else signed up. Was there anyone else who's here that would like to speak that didn't get a chance to speak? If not, then we can move on with the agenda.
Rich, does Kim have any kind of an idea if anyone wants to comment remotely, if they had signed up for that?
Joe, I can't hear you over my computer. Can others, people in the back hear Joe speaking or no? Okay. Gonna try that again, Joe?
My question was, did anyone sign up to speak remotely?
Kim said no.
Okay. Excellent. Then we will move on. And next on our agenda is Rich on your superintendent update, planning for the 2020-2021 school year, considerations for reopening.
Thank you. And there's a couple different things that we want to go through on this agenda item today. And then later on, it's an agenda item for new business under 7B for some possible board action. So in this part of the agenda, it will just be the update and some information. We've been planning for reopening our schools for a while, and as you maybe know, the state of Wisconsin came out with their guidelines for reopening of schools. So I'm going to highlight a few things from that. It is over an 80-page document that just came out today. So we won't go through the whole document, obviously. But before we do that, I want to share a little bit of information about some things coming up both now in June and in July and August through the summer before getting into the back to school in the fall information. So first, if you'll refer to a document on reopening our facilities that's in board docs. Yes, the reopening district facilities memo that's listed there. And I'll share some highlights from that. There's a memo from Stephen Shantz and Carrie Kleba. And if Stephen and Carrie want to add some things to this, I'll kind of give an overview and then open it up for any comments from Carrie or Stephen or any questions or comments from school board members. But in general, that is looking at what we're planning to do starting actually tomorrow on June 23rd. And as I mentioned before, in section 7, in agenda item 7B of our board agenda for tonight, we will be seeking board action for approval on this. It's based on guidelines from Rock County, which has moved into phase 2 recently. And I want to highlight the 6 different points from that document. And on the first one, we're looking tomorrow, Schulberg Park. Some people don't realize that Schulberg Park is a school district facility. It has been, the park has been open for public use, but we have not opened the restroom facilities yet, but we're going to planning to open the restroom facilities starting tomorrow. They will be cleaned once daily, and we'll post signs throughout the park and the restrooms reminding that the use of the facilities are at their own risk, and to encourage proper hygiene and recommended social distancing while people are using the park. We also are beginning to get some rental requests for our parks and school buildings for the summer. And we've added a step to that. Rental of the parks and school buildings, people renting those have to adhere to Rock County recommendations to limit gatherings to 25 or fewer individuals while we're in phase 2. If Rock County moves into phase 3, then those limitations go away. We have an additional form that people sign saying that they understand that they're using the facility at their own risk. And we have a COVID-19 supplement that they sign, just detailing the different steps that they're expected to follow and that they agree to follow those. There's a copy of that form found in board docs. In number 4, following CDC and Rock County recommendations, our facilities are not available for any type of contact sports, games, or tournaments at this time, but we will be allowing non-contact practices and skill camps as long as those participating adhere to the Rock County guidelines and CDC guidelines. Maintaining social distancing, practicing hygiene practices. And at number 5, our locker rooms are considered closed and not available for use at this time. And we put a step in the process where I sign off on facility use agreements for July or for the rest of the summer through the end of August to make sure that groups are aware of Rock County guidelines. And if those change, we will be updating those. We also have a return to summer activity protocol that's more specific for our school activities that I'll highlight, and then Principal Bill Horne is going to highlight some things from that document too. And then when we come back to that agenda item, when we get to number 7, there is a recommended motion that includes approving both the reopening of the district facilities information that I just went through and the return to summer activity protocol that's going to be listed. And we're asking that the board also give me the authority to modify the plan if recommendations from public health officials change. So if Rock County moves to phase 3, that part of the motion would give me the ability to expand our use of the parks without having to wait until our next school board meeting. So the other document that we want to take a look at then is the one titled Summer Activities Protocol. And again, that document was put together by district staff. Principal Bill Horne was very involved in that. The Wisconsin Supreme Court ruling from a few weeks back allowed some things to open up, but also said that schools could not be open for student instruction or for extracurricular activities until July 1st. So starting July 1st, that is no longer in place. So part of this is looking at, when we get to July 1st, what types of procedures do we want to have in place for some of our summer activities to be able to start up again. We followed guidelines from Rock County Public Health and also from the WIAA. And again, we'll be seeking board action for approval on this protocol. And I'm going to turn things over to Principal Bill Horne to walk through some of the highlights of that plan.
All right, as Superintendent Alvin mentioned, on July 1st,
this is for the school contact hours for the WIA for our athletics, but it's also our marching band, it's show choir camps, it is the FFA activities that begin to happen. And so we want to have a unified approach towards how do we begin to open that up. Last Thursday, the WIA released a rather lengthy document about unified protocols. And again, this is just for summer activities. They have not opened up what protocols would be for the fall yet. That's still to come. But this summer, we put together some general guidelines for those wishing to begin to have activities with their students or their athletes. Some of the general guidelines include maintaining physical distancing. We will be asking students and coaches or advisors to be wearing masks if they're going to need to be closer than 6 feet. They were in the guidelines from WIAA, they talked about aerobic activity and such. We're not going to ask cross-country runners to wear masks as they're running in the 80-degree heat. And they made a whole section about not wearing masks if you're swimming as well. I thought that would make sense. But if we do, they are working this again. These are skill camps. These are individual training. This is not contact. So the cleaning and sanitizing part of this is going through what are the protocols with regards to that. We'll be working with Mr. Shantz and Mr. Johnson at the high school on how that will work. That's cleaning after the activities, but also during the activities as well, as much as possible. And the equipment should be single use for students. In some cases that if it needs to be used, we're going to have a protocol with sanitation sprays and whatnot to be able to utilize that. The size of the groups are going to be limited. If it's indoors, it's a limit of 10 students. Outdoors, to 25 as things change. And depending on the size of the facility, we may be able to increase that, but right now 25 is where we're going to be going. There is going to be symptom screening as well. Students have and athletes and the adults will have to self-report the screening with regards to fever, if they have a cough or a sore throat, shortness of breath. The protocol that they'll have, as they do their check-in, they're going to have to report saying that they don't have any of those symptoms. Some of the other considerations, it's important to note that we're working with a with the coaches too. In some cases, we have students that have not had a lot of physical activity for 4 or 5 months. And so we're working with coaches just to remind them as they begin to acclimate students to that activity. This is an important part of getting kids back into it. We want to do it. We want to do it as safe as we can. That's not just with regards to the COVID procedures, but also just making sure that they're healthy. We have some information about hydration and also what we would do if there was a confirmed cases too, which is essentially it's working with the health department. The phase that we will be working here is really July 1 to the 31st. The protocols that we're mentioning that are shared within this document deal just with what we're going to be doing in July. We'll change that, or we'll evolve that as we get into August, because within August, first week of August, is when technically the seasons begin to open up. WIA and hopefully the DPI will have more guidance as we go along. As we know through this entire adventure, things tend to change on us. But hopefully we have some guidelines now that are going to be able to get us through at least the month of July. There is some information there with regards to strength and conditioning as well, specific to the weight room. Again, that's 10 students because it's an indoor activity. One of the things that we are going to be requiring is any coach or advisor who wishes to have some of the summer contact hours, they'll have to put together a sports-specific or activity-specific plan that's utilizing the general guidelines that we provided, what the DPI has provided, and they'll have to go over those with the high school activities athletic director prior to that meeting.
Are you going to be providing PPEs for the masks and gloves at least if the kids need them or coaches want them?
We would provide the masks right now. My understanding, gloves, it's information about gloves in regards to what the production that actually is, but we would, if we need to for masks, we can do that.
But no one will be doing thermometer or temperature checks?
We're going to be asking that they self-screen prior to coming. It's going to be important that they understand the self-screening prior to coming.
No, adults don't always do that. I can't. Some kids won't.
Part of that too, it's really not, it would be difficult to do that on a mass scale without volunteers. There's also students' privacy laws with regards to their health. We can't have volunteers actually taking that health information. That would be, in talking with the district's attorney, we wouldn't be able to do that.
Related to Shelly's question, we did just get notification last week from the state of Wisconsin that the state purchased a large quantity of masks and non-contact thermometers and with some federal money, and they are getting those out to all the school districts. So we will be getting about 7,000 masks and I think 14 no-contact thermometers, and we're supposed to be getting those in mid-July. So the plan is that we would utilize those with students once the school year gets started again. But we'll build those into our plan that we're bringing to the board July 13th.
Will the pool be opening back up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. With the same procedures.
Yeah, we're looking at procedures for this specific to the swimming pool, talking to county public health officials about that. I know some outdoor pools have opened already around the area, and indoor pools have a little bit more risk than outdoor pools. But I think that as long as we can keep people separated, there wouldn't be any hands-on swimming lessons. But if we can keep people separated, if we can do maybe some open lap swimming in alternate lanes and open something up that way.
Jeremy, these athletic standards, can you clarify maybe what will they be doing? I mean, what's going to be allowed?
You know, and one of the, I didn't get into some of the details. WIA actually, they gave out specific guidance for sports considered on what the risk level is. We would consider it a moderate to low risk, and it's supposed to be fluid throughout the entire state. There's some parts of the state where it's a higher risk and lower risk. You go up to northern Bayfield, Wisconsin, and there's 4 cases in Bayfield, Wisconsin. It's different across the state. So within a moderate risk, for example, in baseball, you can actually play catch, all right, but they have to be periodically sanitizing the ball. If we are in a high risk, we wouldn't be able to have the same contact in the same ball. As much as possible, we want to do individual skill training. It's not going to look like a scrimmage. It's not going to look like a game. It partly is trying to get kids with coaches, with each other, getting some activity started. It's going to be a start. I'm talking with Mr. Pierce in the band. He already has it set up, split apart, so there'll be less than 25 students in different sections we'll put them across the campus, having volunteers working with them so that they can begin to work on marching or work on. We are still working on the guidance regards to wind instruments. There's some. We would not be having wind instruments until we get more guidance on what we're able to do with that. Trying to do it as safe as we can. Show choir right now would just be dancing and would not be singing until we learn more about that.
Okay.
Jeremy, do you want to share more about the marching band and what their plans are?
Yeah, so they would be splitting up with learning some of the show. It's going to be learning the time, the pit and battery, the percussion instruments, and some of that they'll be beginning to learn the show. They'll be separated in different parts of the campus. They would not be crossing paths, so they would not be bringing everybody together. Part of the guidance is they have specific cohorts where there's not as much mixing. So it'll be less than 25 students within each of these groups. In some cases, it's going to be less than 10, depending on the area. The color guard, the battery, I'm going to forget something. The drum line, and then the different wind instruments. The wind instruments are going to be learning the marching at this point here too. We're learning more about what we can and can't do with regards to the wind instruments.
And I've been in regular contact with other Rock County superintendents, and I know Jeremy has worked with other both high school principals and activities directors. And I think most of the districts, and maybe even all of the districts in our area, are looking at somewhat similar plans. They won't be exactly the same from district to district, but everybody is looking to start up with some of these activities by practicing social distancing and making sure that we're doing it in as safe a manner as we can.
The document that you have here actually is there. So it was a meeting with all of our Rock County directors last Friday. The document here is very similar, being used across all high schools within Rock County. We're beginning to look at Rock County more than even just the conference, just because of the risk level is different here than other parts of the conference being spread out over 4 different counties.
Jerry, do you know for some of the Milton Rec activities that would have occurred over the summer, will they pick up in some limited capacity between now and the beginning of the school year, or are they just entirely canceled at this point?
I can't the rec activities right now.
Because they're looking at what rec activities they'll be able to offer while staying within these guidelines, and also planning if the guidelines are, if the county moves into phase 3, then jumping into more activities.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts from the board? As I mentioned, this will come back to the board in agenda item 7B for approval.
I like these ideas, and all of this is great planning, and but I want to make sure that we are very cautious. I'm no public health expert, but it's quite evident that a lot of people think moving to phase 2 or the next phase means that things are back to normal, and that's not the case. And I'm afraid of a backslide in the numbers and the cases, and I just want to make sure that rules are being followed and all that stuff. So
I think the communication with students, families, and our staff is going to be very important. So we're very clear about what our guidelines are, and that we really encourage them to be alert to the fact that the better job that we do of this, the sooner we'll be back to being able to have full participation. If we're cautious and we're taking steps to make sure we're doing this in a safe manner, that will move us into phase 3 more quickly.
One of the messages that I'll have when they put together their plans is that especially for coaches, is that there can be a lot of pressure put on the students about to make sure that I participate. And it is purely voluntary as well. We're going to make sure coaches understand that has to, if a family or students choose not to participate in the activity this summer, that's okay.
Those were the 2 parts that we'll be bringing for approval, but I do want to share information on the state plan that came out today. Joe, did you have anything remotely before I jump into the state plan?
No, I'm good. I just noticed the state plan is rather lengthy, so there's a lot of stuff there.
I'm not going to read the whole plan to you tonight. There are a few things though that I want to highlight, so I'll jump into that. And you can see, and we have a binder. Education Forward is the name of the plan that the state came out with. It's the same information that went out to every school district across the state, and it was released just today. And a few things that I want to highlight, they reinforced Again, it's a lengthy document, not just the 80 plus pages here, but there's links to other sections. There's a separate section on transportation that isn't part of the 80 some pages. There's a separate section on school nutrition and food service. They also reinforce that it's a fluid document that will continue to be updated as the situation changes. Hopefully, as we have fewer cases, we will be able to lessen some of the restrictions. But if there is a increase in number of cases, it may have to be tightened up a little bit too. The information that was shared by the state has a lot of similarities to the work that we've been doing so far. Our admin team has split up into different groups to do some planning. We haven't put together our final plan yet because we were waiting for the guidelines from the state. And these truly are guidelines from the state. They are not saying that every district in the state has to do what it says here. This is really saying, here are some recommendations, some things your district should be thinking about and considering, but they reinforce very, very often that these are local decisions. Every school district will be deciding how they want to approach these issues. Some of the different topic areas that we've been working on that are matched in the plan include how we're going to be addressing instruction for students, our overall operations as a district, technology, wellness for students and staff, governance, and facilities. We're developing multiple options for what September will look like. And as we get closer, we'll be able to refine those options, ranging all the way from instruction, all the way from all students back on a regular basis, to a completely virtual option, and then some hybrid systems in between. We want to be prepared for any of those possible scenarios. We're working with local health officials, Rock County health officials, and state health officials, and really looking at how do we best provide an education for our students while minimizing the risk for students and staff. One page from the document that I want to highlight, Kim, if you want to scroll to that goals page. And I want to highlight that page because it talks about the overarching goals for returning to school. And the first is keeping students and staff physically safe. And there's nothing that we can do, obviously, to guarantee that a student or staff member or a visitor to the schools won't catch the virus. But we want to make sure that we are putting steps in place to minimize that risk. The second goal is caring for the social, emotional, and mental health needs of students and staff. This has been a difficult time for everyone, and we want to make sure that we're alert to the different things that are going on in students' lives and in staff's lives. The third is keeping learning coherent, creating a scope of standards with aligned systems of assessments and units of instruction. Again, whether that learning is in person, virtual, or physically distanced. Meeting the needs of every student by considering unique experiences of students and considering students' families as active partners in learning. I think that idea that not everyone's situation is the same, and we want to be alert to those unique differences amongst students. And the last is designing flexibility in the school schedules, built environments, protocols, and norms for when we are together in person or physically distanced or through virtual learning. Really what we'll be doing now that the state has put this plan together is we've mentioned in the past that we're working with other Rock County school districts. So one big next step is to both review these guidelines since they just came out today, and bringing back our recommendation to the board at the July 13th school board meeting. But in between now and July 13th, we have a parent survey that'll be going out tomorrow. We want to hear feedback from our parents on concerns that they have about their child coming back to school, about transportation, about participation in extracurricular activities. So that we'll be emailing a link to that survey out tomorrow to parents. They'll have a week to fill that out. Other school districts in Rock County are also utilizing that same survey. We'll be staying in touch with the county public health department, with our insurance carrier and our legal counsel for specific guidance on our reopening plans. Our teams will continue to meet over the next 2 weeks to finalize our plans, and we'll be first determining what our main instructional model will be, and then we can build some of our other plans around that decision. How we group kids, how we keep them in cohorts together, what kind of capacity we have in our different schools for bringing students back while maintaining social distancing. And then big decisions about personal protective equipment, mask wearing, screening of students and staff members, any changes to transportation and to school nutrition. So those are some of the decisions that we'll be making and bringing a recommendation to the school board on July 13th. So any questions, comments, thoughts from board members on any of those topics? And again, that's more geared toward when all of our students come back in the fall.
Okay, I'm hearing no questions, so I think that allows me to move on. Next on our agenda is our referendum update, and I believe I saw Mike Huffman joining us remotely, and if he's on too, we would be glad to hear what Mike has to share.
Okay. Good evening.
Welcome.
You should have received my report in your board packet. And I just wanted to hit a few highlights on that. I had it on my screen. I gotta pull it back up here. Okay. So progress has been very good at the construction. Progress has been very good at the schools. I went into a little bit more detail in the report than I'll do here, but essentially at the elementary schools, the work has really transitioned from structural and rough mechanical installations to now working on some of the finished materials. So over at East, if you've been by there, you can see that we are finally getting installation of windows. That had been kind of the big schedule delay there, but window frames are now all in at East, and the glazing actually into those frames will follow. West has moved along quite well with the exterior grass areas now having been restored. And quite a bit of the remodel work on the interior of the existing building is complete, and the addition is again moving into the finished materials on that building as well. Similar progress over at Harmony. Consolidated is a bit behind the other schools. That's not that it's behind schedule, but it was the last project that we started among the elementary schools. It is a smaller one, so they're still kind of finishing up structure there, and we'll quickly transition to the finished materials. Over at the middle school, continue to do the below grade work, so footings and foundation. They've moved into underground plumbing and utilities, getting ready to pour the slab on grade. So once that underground work is done, you'll start to see a lot more visual progress at the middle school, but it's going well there. The high school is, it might look like a bit of a mess right now if you've been by. JP Cullen and their subs are working in 3 distinct areas for the addition. So as you've known, the STEM wing has been under construction for some time now. That continues, and more work is opening up there for different trades. But on the other side of the building, the pool subgrade is now prepped and ready to for actual up out of the ground construction activities to start. So the rammed aggregate piers that bolstered the soil bearing capacity there in the pool area have all been completed. And now you can see more of the traditional construction activities with footing and foundation starting. Also on that side of the building, the extension to the gymnasium area, so the added gym is now under construction. So a lot of activity there, a lot of work to get done in order to get your site back into a usable mode for the fall. So there's definitely some pressure on the job, not so much as we look out towards completion, but just getting it to the point where construction activity and academic activity can all exist on the same site. So we'll be watching that very closely for that milestone part of the schedule. But so far, all looks good there. I think some of the project administration activities I wanted to touch on is to just make you aware that as a construction team and a design team, we are talking about the pandemic and what it will look like in the fall for the school to come back and how that might affect the construction activities. So certainly where we have the limited construction activity inside of the existing buildings, we would expect that we would very much follow the lead of administration, and there certainly could be some different rules to how construction would proceed in areas where there could be interface with the student body. Little bit less so out on the site of the additions, because those will be fenced off areas, and there shouldn't be interaction between construction and the academics. But certainly we're prepared to respond to administration's direction related to the pandemic. I think the only other thing I wanted to touch on there, well, two things. From an administrative standpoint, we are very much talking now about how we facilitate the move back in process at the elementary schools. So you will be utilizing all of the spaces that we're constructing at this time. So we're shooting towards an August 17th occupancy date, and that would be the time at which teachers and staff can get into those spaces and begin to prepare the spaces for the fall. Backing up from that, we've got furniture orders that have been placed, and we are trying to accommodate installation of all that new furniture by August 3rd. So all looks good there. You know, we had an opportunity to get ahead a little bit with the elementary schools because you had vacated the buildings, and that definitely is going to work out well for us. It's not quite the summer blitz that we might have expected with the elementary schools, and that's all good news. I think the last thing I want to touch on from a project administration aspect is last month I told you that we were gearing up for what I'll call the budget summit. So this really was my staff, which myself and Steve Clavin sat down with Stephen Shantz, Carrie and Rich, and just went through the budget on a line-by-line basis and said, okay, now that we're not so much predicting costs, but we have actual costs primarily for the construction bidding activities, let's make sure we've got all the right numbers plugged in all the way down the budget, line by line by line, and reconsider any areas where we think we need to make adjustments, and just confirm that we're all on the same page with each of those line items. And that was sorry, Joe, you also participated in that meeting. I left you out there. You were on the phone. So I thought that was very successful. Everything was confirmed. We had no surprises. We made minor amount of adjustments, but we sit in a good spot. We're about, by cost, we are about 20% done with the overall referendum project. Our contingency still is very good at about $1.2 million for owner contingency. And we're past a lot of the areas where you have big risk. Certainly on all projects, when you're doing subterranean work, there's a lot of risk. And when you get up out of the ground, there's certainly a big risk factor that's been passed by. So I feel good about where we sit with owner contingency for the rest of the job. Yeah, in general, I think we're in a very good spot with respect to the budget. That's about all I've got.
Mike, this is Rick Mullen. Thanks as always for the update, but I also wanted to say thanks for including those pictures. It's nice to see what's going on in some of the enclosed buildings, but also at places like the high school where we just can't do a drive-by to see what's going on. So thanks for those, and I'd love it if you could keep those coming in the future too. So thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. But you know, when I go out there for a site visit, I feel like I'm putting on a lot of miles just to get to all 4 elementary schools, middle school, high school. I mean, all the way out to Consolidated. So I can imagine that you don't get to drive by all of them, and certainly don't get to get inside of them. So we'll definitely keep that up.
Very good. Thanks, Mike. Does anyone else have any questions before we excuse him? And I'm hearing none. So thank you, Mike, and we look forward to visiting again.
Okay.
Okay, agenda-wise, I am up to 4. The HR committee report, and as I shared earlier, Diamond is unable to make it tonight, so I am going to ask Rich and Chris Tukendorf to take the lead on covering the topics that we got involved on HR.
Chris Tukendorf is at the podium, so I'll turn things over to Chris to walk through the HR committee agenda items.
Okay, thank you, Rich. The HR committee met on June 17th, and we talked about 2 items. First was the hiring of employees and an update that the HR department is slowly moving towards a paperless process. And our first step in that process is to create screencasts for each of our documents that we provide to our new employees. And if any of you were hired by the school district of Milton, and not necessarily board members, but teachers, and Mr. Hoffman, many years ago, the process has changed since you were first hired by the school district. But right now, the new hire process lasts 2.5 hours. And it's 2 inches worth of paperwork that we go through. Anything starting with a W-4 to a contract or a letter of employment, all the way to the health insurance. And then we have numerous conversations. So the HR department is working towards trying to help streamline that process and creating screencasts for each form that we are going to share with the new hires is a goal that we're going to have and hopefully be done by end of June. Any questions or any additions from Joe or Rick from the HR committee on that item?
Nope, I think you're good.
Okay. Item number 2 was discussion and possible action on the 2021 summer school staffing baseline. And as we noted in previous HR committee meetings, as well as previous board meetings, we worked to establish employee baselines for the 2021 school year. And summer school is no different. It has become quite difficult to establish a baseline because summer school crosses 2 fiscal years. And with our current virtual school setting, also makes it difficult. The June 2021 summer school baseline was from the last fiscal year, which is 1920, and we are currently working on July of 2020, August of 2020, and June of 2021. So what we would like to propose to the board would be to put a general kind of an anticipated number of employees that we are going to need for July, August, and next June at 143 summer school positions. Please note that it's a maximum number of summer school staff was averaged over the last 3 years to come up with that 143. If additional staff are needed in August of 2020 or June of 2021, administration and the HR committee will bring forth those additional staff needs to the board for the review. Any questions about that?
Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. If no one has any questions, it's an action item. We do need to get this approved if folks are willing to do that.
I'll make a motion that the number of staff positions not exceed 143 summer school positions for the 2020-2021 summer school program, and any additional positions not listed in the baseline will be subject to board policy 4111 and brought forward to the board for review and possible approval.
I would second that motion.
Excellent. Thank you. As you heard, motion from Mike, seconded by Dave. And I won't reread it because you all just heard him say it. If there are no questions on that motion, we will vote that. All in favor of that motion's approval signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? And I call that motion passed. Thank you, Mr. Tukendorf. On we go to the Finance Committee report. And here again, with Diamond not able to make it tonight, Dave and I will help, but I'm going to have Rich probably walk through the line items here. And we do have a document included with letter D. So if Rich, if you want to touch base on what our discussion was at the Finance Committee level.
I will share some things, and then I'll ask Carrie Bradley to share some details too on the information from the Finance Committee. The first agenda item from the Finance Committee was the Buy-A-Seat program, and we talked about that topic both with the Finance Committee and the Transportation Committee. You'll see in agenda item 6D, we're looking for a discussion and possible action on Buy-A-Seat program fees. So I'm not going to highlight a lot of things in this one because we'll talk about it again with some more details in the Transportation Committee. But the next Finance Committee agenda item was the current fiscal year, the 2019-2020 budget performance review. And I'm going to ask Carrie Bradley to share a few highlights from that agenda item, and then the referendum process and timeline, and the multi-year budget forecast model. So the next three things on the agenda from the Finance Committee, and I'll turn things over to Carrie.
All right, thanks, Rick. I'm not at the podium because I have piles of paper so that I can keep everything straight with all the agenda items we have. So I'm going to stay at my seat if you don't mind. When we talk about the 1920 budget performance review, we always talk about how the budget is put together with what we know at a point in time. And in the fall, this budget was put together with what we knew at that point in time. Every budget will have an ebb and flow in revenues and expenses. And then when you get to the end, you end up with a surplus or a deficit, just at a very high level. So in our committee meeting, we talked about some areas where we can, some things that are known at this point. We have a payroll that's still run in July. So even though June 30th is the end of our fiscal year, we continue to have some activity. But we talked about a couple of things that were related to COVID. We talked about savings related to substitute teachers. There are extracurricular field trips that didn't happen. And then we had some specialized transportation costs that would be less as well. But we also talked about some things that will cost more than we had anticipated. And one of the things we talked about was open enrollment. And when you look at open enrollment, that's the statewide school choice program. There's a revenue component and there's an expenditure component. So when I talk about those, I usually talk about the net difference. And if you also recall, I think it was the last meeting, that number continues to change until May. So we do the estimate based on what we have in the fall. And then people enter the program, people leave the program, and we finally find out in May, that's when things stop moving. So we will have about a $50,000 shortfall when it comes to our open enrollment costs. When I look at the budget in its entirety, I think that we can anticipate having a surplus of revenues over expenditures at year end. And so one of the things the committee talked about was to begin thinking about, if we're in that situation, what is the best plan? If you recall, we started that capital improvement trust fund with just $100 to get that 5-year clock ticking. So that's one option. That would be a transfer from 10 to 46, and then that would be considered an aidable cost next year. We could also consider building our Fund 10 or our general fund balance. And some discussion was around the uncertainty of the future and how that might be a good thing for us to consider. And then the committee also reminded me that we have a post-employment benefit trust fund, an OPEB trust, which is Fund 73, that is used to help fund post-retirement health insurance benefits, is the short version of what that is. And so that would be another thing that we could do when we get to year end. We started the year with about $165,000 projected deficit. And again, I anticipate that when all is said and done, we will cover that and then have additional funds that we're going to have to decide what to do with. So that is what the committee talked about when we did our budget review. We also began conversations about the referendum process and the timeline. And as many are aware, and the board members are definitely aware, that we have additional revenue authority through a non-recurring referendum, and that will expire in fiscal year 21-22 or school year 21-22. So we have 2.5 million in levy authority in that non-recurring referendum that we're planning for next year, which is 2021. But we need to start talking about what we're going to do with regard to that additional revenue authority, and think about where to go to move forward, looking at options and looking at consequences. And then the last item with regard to the Finance Committee is there's a multi-year budget forecast model. There is a document in board docs that you should have and that Kim has up, okay? And so in order to have a starting point to talk about the future, if you look at the document, it has historical data that will show our past budget performance. And then it also will show the impact on fund balance. And then I took the current year, where we're projecting that $165,000 deficit, and for the most part, froze those expenditures moving forward into the next 5 years. And then we let the controlled revenue, we let the revenue limit do its thing, if you will, okay? And so when we talk about the revenue limit, that's controlled revenues, and that's where the referendum conversation comes in. The mechanism to increase your controlled revenues is the revenue limit. And so right now for 2021, we had estimated that we'll have some additional dollars to work with. And this is before the conversation about planning for a potential budget repair bill. Okay, so pre-COVID, for lack of a better way to say it. And part of the reason I did this is we need a starting point to begin to have a conversation. And that's what this is. And so if you look at the bar graph, you will see that because the non-recurring referendum expires Okay, you're going to see that we have a deficit projected in all the years past next year. So when the referendum is expired, we have a deficit. So we need to talk about how we're going to address that deficit and what our options are. And then typically the bar chart below shows fund balance. And you can see the fund balance bar shrinking, and then the fund balance as a percentage of expenditures going down as well. So when you don't increase your revenues, when you do projections, unless you modify your budget, you use generally, you would use fund balance, but it's not going to last that long. So that would show the limitations on that kind of a strategy as well. So the point of the document is to kind of get a picture of the future. And then from there, we talk about options, choices, priorities, and consequences. And did the committee members have anything else to add?
One item I think is worth noting is as you look at the budget year 2020, 2021, the projected surplus, which you touched upon, carries approximately $850,000 under the current state budget. If state revenues do not go up by the $300 per student, if it just simply stays flat, as I recall, that'll immediately put us into a deficit position of approximately 100,000. Is that right? Just for kind of characterization for anyone who didn't have a chance to sit into the meeting, that the state budget repair bill, which seems all but inevitable, is absolutely critical to what this number looks like for the upcoming school year. And I guess just wanted to reiterate that because it looks on a glance okay, but certainly there's a lot of question marks behind that number today based on what we know.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you emphasize that, and that is correct. And basically, if we end up with a 0, we end up with no increase whatsoever for next year, and then that puts us even further behind as we project into the following year. And I think it's important to note that, and that this is just a starting position to have a conversation. This is not our future budget actuals or our future budget plans. But I'm glad you brought that up because then our situation will be even further escalated. Maybe this would be a good choice of words if there is a change in current year revenues. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Can I ask a quick question? From your expertise, do you have a percentage in your head that you would like to see the fund balance be at from year to year?
Generally speaking, 20, there's different ways to talk about fund balance. Okay. One is this percentage piece. And another way is to talk about, can you pay 3 months of bills? And then another way, or the total of 3 months of bills. And then another way to talk about it is, do you need to cash flow borrow? Okay. And in our district, we cash flow borrow because when our money comes in and our money goes out, the timing doesn't work. So we need to borrow money so that when we get those future tax revenues that are paid, we need to borrow money to pay our bills. So in a perfect world, and I never realized this, but there are districts out there that have fund balances sufficient that they don't have to cash flow borrow. The districts I have worked with have never been in that financial position, and we always cash flow borrowed. So so that's one reason the fund balance concern, right? And that's why they do that. A measure is the percentage of, and around 20 to 25. I think in the audit report, the auditors will speak to it as well. I don't know if they soften that to like an 18 to 23, somewhere in that range. Okay, I high level target 20. 20 has always been a historical target. You will still have to cash flow borrow, but it might be less depending upon where our revenue comes from. Because with the state aid payments, you anticipate when they're coming, and then the other place our revenue comes from are those tax dollars. So, but the other thing we want fund balance for is when things happen that we don't plan for. Okay, you would use fund balance to pay for unexpected things, and I think that's in Milton's history. I think unexpected things have happened, and we've used fund balance because they needed to be taken care of. Having fund balance also gives you the flexibility to fund something, and then you can spend the year trying to figure out how you're going to adapt for that. So if your goal is a balanced budget and you're trying to achieve a balanced budget, and in the fall all of a sudden something goes haywire just when you're ready to adopt the budget, after we've issued contracts, we've done all our work, we're doing our best information at a point in time, and you get a new piece of information in the fall, if you have, the more fund balance you have, the more flexibility you have in responding to those types of things. And so that's a very long answer to a very direct question. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, but I heard you say 20%. If
Yeah,
we're looking at the percentage.
Other things that I would like you to please consider in the 20%.
If we're looking at the percentage, I heard you say 20%. Would that be
I
accurate?
didn't answer the question. You are correct.
Okay, thank you.
But there's all kinds of things we should be
I'm
considering.
totally with you. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would, the piece I would add is back when we were going to referendum, of course, the bond rating houses all give us ratings, et cetera, and we got guidance there that high teens to low 20s is a sort of an achievable goal for a lot of districts, and they kind of patted us on the back for being in a nice range there. So that's historically what we've done.
Carrie, I know that there's lots of moving pieces, as you say, and things ebb and flow, but do you have a dollar amount for this anticipated surplus?
Not at this point in time. No.
Okay.
I'm just telling you to be ready for it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does anybody else have questions on the Finance Committee report? And if not, we are going to segue over to Transportation Committee. That also is Dave and myself. And there will be some overlap on some of the topics, but if we want to start at the top, I'm going to let Dave go with some administrative assistance, I'm presuming, to talk through the committee report here. And I lost Dave. Is he still online?
Joe, Dave got kicked off, so he's getting rebooted.
All righty.
Can you all hear me?
Now we can. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry for that delay. Had the Transportation Committee meeting on Thursday, June 18th, discussed a variety of items. I'd like to go through just at a high level those items and then have Rich join in and add some color commentary beyond each of them. So breaking down the agenda from that day into the 4 core items were updates to the Administrative Guideline 8600, which covers transportation, revisions to and integration of various areas into the daycare transportation discussion that we've had recently, revisions to and updates to transportation for 4K students as it relates to the district as a whole, as well as some transportation revisions available in the midday section. And then lastly, by a seat and looking at some adjustments for inflation based on the program's inception in 2011 and where it stood today. Including with that, there was 2 items that came forward. That'll be action items on the agenda today. But Rich, if you'd like to perhaps go into maybe greater detail on those 4 items, and we can certainly have a discussion accordingly.
Yeah, I'll share some information on kind of an overview of the Administrative Guideline 8600, and then I'll ask Jen Kramer and Carrie Bradley to go into a little bit more of the details on the daycare transportation, the transportation for 4K students, and discussion and possible action on BioSeed program. With the administrative guidelines, we utilize administrative guidelines to detail how we're going to implement board policy. So the board has a policy number 8600 on transportation, And then our admin team puts together some specifics on how we're going to implement that. And while the board approves the policies, the board doesn't approve the administrative guidelines. They leave that up to our admin team to determine how we're going to implement those policies. So a couple things that I want to highlight from the administrative guideline. It details which students are eligible for what we would call free transportation. And that's in number 1 on the AG. It's resident students in 4K through 12th grade if their primary address is 2 or more miles from their assigned school, or resident 4K through 12 students whose primary address is in a UHT, an unusually hazardous transportation area. That's 2 miles or less from their assigned school, or resident students who are administratively assigned to a school outside their attendance area and whose primary address is 2 or more miles from such schools. So throughout the administrative guideline, it refers at times to eligible students or students who are eligible for free transportation. So those are the groups of students that we're referring to. In number 2 there, and we'll get into more details with the 4K transportation, so I think I'll wait on that one until we get to that portion of the agenda. In number 3, transportation will be provided to one consistent pickup and drop-off location within the attendance area for all eligible riders. So students can be picked up at one location and dropped off at a different location, and many students do that at home or daycare, might be the 2 locations. But it needs to be a consistent pickup location and a consistent drop-off location. Administratively assigned students who are eligible riders will get transportation to and from their assigned school. Sometimes we have students that are assigned to a school because of an academic program that's offered at that school. And students who are requesting to attend a school outside of their attendance area are not eligible for free transportation. But we also have in Part B the Buy-A-Seat program. And again, we'll get into more details on the Buy-A-Seat program later on in the agenda, including the cost of the Buy-A-Seat program. But we talked about this at both the both the Finance Committee meeting and the Transportation Committee meeting. And we actually had 2 Transportation Committee meetings where we talked through all of these different items. Buy-A-Seat program is available for parents of non-resident students to and from a stop within the district boundaries if it's on an existing route to their assigned school. Parents of resident students who aren't eligible for transportation can request transportation on an existing route to their assigned school through the Buy-A-Seat program. Or in number 3, the midday transportation for the 4K students. It'll be provided free if it's within their attendance area, and it will be provided as part of the Buy-A-Seat program for students who are outside of their attendance area. And one specific for 4K, because we don't have a 4K class offered at Consolidated. So the attendance area for 4K is, instead of having 4 different attendance areas, we have 3. One is the Harmony area, and it's the same as the K through 3 attendance area for Harmony. One is for Milton East, and it's the same as the attendance area for kindergarten through 3rd grade for Milton East. But then the third is taking the 2 attendance areas for Consolidated and West and grouping them into one attendance area specific for 4K students. Then we have in Part C in the administrative guideline, pickup and drop off, are details about those pickup and drop off locations. Again, parents may select one consistent pickup, one consistent drop off location per student. The bus stops, we don't pick up at door to door for every student, especially within our larger populated areas. But we do have common bus stops. By state law, they can be no more than 1 mile from an eligible student's residence, and most of ours are considerably less than that distance. Students cannot ride unassigned buses for any reason other than an emergency with the principal's approval. Assigned stops are to be regular and determined when a student requests transportation, and limited changes may be allowed with prior notice of 48 hours and approval of the principal. So if a parent wants on Friday that child to be dropped off at the grandparents' home, for instance, and that's on a regular route, If they give us 48 hours notice, we will make that happen. Daily and weekly changes, though, for pickup and drop-offs are not allowed. In C Part 2, the routes will be finalized no later than 5 business days prior to the start of the school year or summer session. Those locations won't change during the first week of the school year or summer session. And requests received after the routes are finalized will be reviewed after the first week of school is finished. Daycare facilities can annually request a stop at their place of business if the address is on the path of travel for a regular route, beginning with this coming school year. And we'll share more information specific to daycare transportation later on in this agenda item. And then Part D has some specifics about transportation for students with dual households. If a student lives some days at one household and then other days at another parent or guardian's household in separate households, the transportation eligibility will be determined based on the student's primary address, and the parents let us know which address they want to have as the primary address. If transportation to the secondary address is requested, both of those addresses must follow the criteria explained below. The district must have the address on file as a secondary address, and parents may be asked to provide court documents to verify that that is a secondary address for a parent or guardian. And in Part 3, each household may select one pickup and one drop-off location per student within the attendance area. The schedule must follow a consistent pattern. Limited changes may be allowed with prior notice of a week and approval of the principal, but daily and weekly changes are not allowed. So again, there are some more details on a couple of those items from that, on daycare transportation and 4K transportation. So I think we'll go through those things and then open it up for any questions or comments from board members. For daycare transportation, there is a map that's included, and I'll let Principal Kramer share some details about the process and where we landed with daycare transportation.
Sure. When we initially had brought the plan to the board about the attendance boundaries and our attendance areas, it was also determined that daycares that were within those attendance areas, those would be the only places that we would provide transportation. So for example, Small Wonders is located in the east boundary. So at that time, we said that only students from east would be able to get transportation to Small Wonders. After having a listening session with not only our licensed daycare providers, but our unlicensed daycare providers, we took some feedback. We were able to meet with the bus company and take a look at could we find buses that were in route of travel, doing other things, and be able to expand that and have daycares be like a dual zone or even a triple. And so what we came up with is provided in the board packet that many of our daycare centers were able to be a dual zone. So for example, if we take, let's just say the YMCA, which is a group daycare facility here in Milton, which is located in the east attendance area, but they will be able to bus students to East, Harmony, and Consolidated. Now this list, some of you might look at it and wonder, well, I know so-and-so who provides daycare and they're not on this list. Please have them contact myself or the bus company to provide the correct information to be able to get on this list. So it's not an extensive list, it's in the works. These are the people that we have heard from so far, and so we can get them on the list. Anything else you'd like me to add, Mr. Dahman, in regards to the daycare transportation?
I think that covered the details that we talked about at the committee meeting.
Okay. Moving on to the 4K transportation.
Just to clarify,
Yep.
Mrs. Kramer,
Sure.
these multi-facility daycares,
Sure.
that doesn't include transfers, right? Because that was the whole.
Yes,
Right.
thank
So
you.
just because they're going to more than one school doesn't mean that these are kids that are going to transfer.
Right. So a perfect example I think that everyone can relate to would be Tammy's Tender Times is located, according to our attendance area map, is an east daycare center. However, it is located right on Madison Avenue, pretty much right in the middle of both east and west. So it made sense that that bus, without having crazy transfers or going out of the way, could make that happen for both east and west families. Okay, so thank you for clarifying.
Ms. Kramer, do any of these daycares have their own transportation, like passenger vans, and provide their own, like does the Y or anybody like that?
Yeah, great question. That was part of our brainstorming with the daycare centers when we had met to kind of see what options were out there. You know, that was one of the suggestions that was brought to the table, but a lot of times that would involve a commercial driver's license or CDL for them to have a 15-passenger van. So fiscally, the feedback we heard from the daycare centers, it was not an option. So the answer to your question is no, but we did discuss that.
And it really is it's a balancing act. We want to make sure that we offer a transportation system, and by system I mean getting all kids across the district to and from their schools in a safe and efficient manner. We have a responsibility to do that. We want to make sure that we're meeting as many of the needs of both families and daycare providers as possible. But in the system that we used to have, we were doing a lot of that to the extent where it was causing a lot of problems both for other students and for other families and school staff. So that really details why we needed to make the changes that we've made, and we aren't able to provide transportation from every daycare to any of the 4 different schools, or we would be right back in the system that we had before. But we do feel like the system that we put together, and this was based on a lot of feedback from the daycare providers, is going to be a good next step for us. And it'll give us an opportunity this fall, again, depending on what we're doing for transportation with COVID, but it'll give us an opportunity to see how well this plan works. And then if there are some changes that we want to make based on how it goes in the fall, we'll make sure that we bring those changes back to the board in time for daycares to have a lot of time to make adjustments for the 2021-22 school year.
Any other questions regarding daycare transportation? All right, is it okay if we move on to C, Rich? Okay, letter C, discussion possible action on transportation for 4K students. I'll start, Carrie, and then if you need to add anything, is that okay? All right, one of the things that Rich had mentioned in our Administrative Guidelines 8600 speaks to our 4K transportation. Back in August of 2019, the board had approved at that time to provide transportation for all 4K students. Part of the reason that we had brought that to the board was due to the 4K center, which is located at Small Wonders. And because of where it was located, it didn't make sense for any 4K student to walk to school, crossing North Janesville Street or Old Highway 26 to get there in a safe manner when you're 4 to 5 years old didn't seem reasonable. So at that time, the board did approve to provide transportation for all 4K students, even if they lived right in town walking distance. We are bringing to the board tonight a action item to change that and to treat the 4K students like we do the kindergarten through 3rd grade now that they are in their attendance area school. Because we've moved all 4K sections to East, West, and Harmony, then it would go back to that criteria that Mr. Dahman talked about earlier about if you are outside of 2 miles or in a unusually hazardous area, then you would be eligible for transportation. Therefore, we as a district would provide it. And so, Carrie, you want to speak exactly to what the language is, but actually before you do, one other clarification I would like to bring for that 4K transportation piece is the flexibility that we will be able to offer families during those midday routes. So what that means is if you have your child at Milton East and that's your attendance area, but your daycare is over on the west side of town, okay? So it's outside of your attendance area. We will provide transportation only on those midday routes. So if you're an AM 4K, we'll get you, when school is over in the morning, we'll get you over to that west side. Or if you were to flip that, we would get you from that west daycare and bring you over to east. However, at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, we would not be providing that transportation outside of the attendance area. So that's one thing that I know, Rich, you had spoke to, and I just wanted to try to bring clarification, and I might have confused a few people along the way, and I apologize. But having said that, Carrie, do you want to talk to what the memo says for the action item?
Certainly. Mrs. Kramer covered what's in the memo and then some. But the reason that the memo and the action item is here for you is because of the board action that was taken last year to provide transportation free for all 4K kids. So that since that action was taken, you would need to take action again to basically, if you will, remove that, which was in place because of the way we delivered 4K. So there's a sample motion that just says that I move that eligibility for transportation free of charge for 4K students to be consistent with that of K-12 students.
With that, Carrie, just one item of just, I know, Jen, you mentioned it already, but it's specific to this too, is the consolidation of the, or integration of the consolidated and west areas, so that the additional daycares that were discussed and expressed in some of the other sessions that have additional integration, additional availability. I know you mentioned as part of the other things, we just wanted to reiterate that carries over to the 4K group as well, that additional availability. Carrie, unless you had something to add, I'm comfortable making the motion. I would move the eligibility for transportation free of charge for all 4K students be consistent with that of K-12 students.
I'll second.
Sorry about that. I was muted. Thank you. Motion from Dave, seconded by Rick, as you just heard. Is there any other discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving that change signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? That motion passes. Okay. And staying with transportation, we have another, Dave, if you want to get D covered here yet.
Sure. So another item covered at the Transportation Committee was the buy seat program, as outlined in the board docs. The policy that's in place today dates back to February of 2011. Carrie kindly did extensive research, as I understand it, trying to understand the logic that went into assessing the original fee of $150 per student at the time. It sounds like that initial documentation didn't exist. However, in analyzing where we were then and where we were now, generally speaking, we were approximately 30% of transportation costs that were being covered through the buy a seat program. Looking at growth of transportation inflation from then until now, suggested that a $200 buy a seat program as an individual and a $400 family cap would be an inflation adjustment, if you will. Also, after extensive discussion on it, the addition of offering reduced rates for families that have a financial need were included as well. So analysis of trying to update the program and still be consistent with the ability of folks to pay, trying to balance out in that. Rich, Ms. Kramer, I don't know if you have additional to include with that, but that covers most of what we discussed with the buy a seat program.
I think that covered it pretty well. I don't know if Carrie or Jen have anything else to add. I'm seeing some heads shaking, saying no. So I think that did cover it pretty well.
Okay, if there's no further questions, I would move to increase the annual buy a seat program fee to $200 per pupil and increase the family cap to $400 and approve the implementation of reduced rates based on financial need as presented.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Motion from Dave, seconded by Mike, to adjust our buy a seat rates along the lines that you just saw there. Are there any other questions on that motion?
So just to clarify then, the rates haven't been raised since 2011, correct?
That's a very good distinction, and part of what the committee kind of discovered and I guess I don't want to speak for the committee chair here, but we all recognize that it probably needs to catch up a little bit, and we felt like this was kind of a stepwise process toward that. So the answer is yes, it has not changed since 2011.
The only thing that this would have been, to piggyback on that, Joe, is, again, approximately 30% of the cost was being covered. The time it was implemented in 2011, and this fast forwarding to today is getting us back to roughly that 30% coverage. So as a percentage, we're being consistent. Unfortunately, the dollar amount had not kept up with the cost of inflation over approximately a decade since it was implemented.
Yeah.
I guess I just have, I guess a question I have is, why aren't we going for 100% of the coverage? I guess, is there a reason, or?
Good question with that. Joe and Rich, feel free to interject.
I can share a little bit, and then if Joe has things to add, or if Carrie Bradley has things to add. We did talk about that a little bit. Excuse me a second. We did talk about that as an option of raising it more than the $50 from $150 to $200. And I think Dave alluded to it earlier that where we landed was making it more of a step process. That for this first year, we're going to go to that amount, but I think it will be something that we'll need to revisit from year to year. With the current financial difficulties that some families are facing, we decided not to jump into a larger change at this point. And Joe, anything else that you have to add to that, or Carrie Bradley, anything else?
Well, I would just echo that, and that the committee's thought was that exactly. We do need to probably move closer to 100% and feel like we can't do it in one jump. So this, we felt like was a reasonable start, and we would look at this again in a year and, see how it is shaken out. But, quite likely this will get adjusted again at some point.
I guess my thinking is, if we're only increasing it 50, even next year, if we increase it 100, we're still only to less than 50%. I guess I would think maybe it'd be better off to increase it a little more this year, and then next year we'll maybe be close to the 100%. I mean, I understand both the recommendation, but
I think, it's interesting. I think we discussed that topic for 20 minutes, half hour, and decided it was probably a bridge too far to try to solve all in one year. In light of some of the economic conditions and some of the impacts it's had on some of the families, the idea of that to at least keep us on par, if you will, wasn't a terrible start. But to implement this, one of the things that we don't know is there's not a specific equation that will say if these are the inputs and the outputs will be this. And so after a year to revisit, what was the impact of the change? And then rather than waiting a decade to look at it again, bring it up as an agenda item in 2021, and then make an assessment based on not only what we did, but what the outcomes of what we did resulted in. And so I think the intent is to take some baby steps, if you will, and make some adjustments, not only now, but to revisit it again in a year and see if, where we are relative to other things. So your point is well taken, that it's still a 2/3 of it's being carried on just the general fund, but trying to get us in that direction, but perhaps not as is a significant jump all at once. Joe, I don't know if I shared
the other thing about Buy-A-Seat, just to bring a little bit more background to how it works, is that you can only buy a seat if there is already an existing stop and if there's room on the bus. So I don't disagree about that 600 piece, but I think it's important to understand that we don't create a new stop, which costs, which is time and, gas if it's outside of, so it has to be an existing stop that they're adding on to. I mean, that doesn't change the dollar part, but it's not like we're zigzagging all around creating new stops for families.
Yeah, I understand. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, anybody else with questions? We have a motion on the floor. And if there are none, all in favor of the motion to adjust our bias seat rates as we've discussed, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you. That motion passes. And with that, I believe we will thank Chairman Dave for the Transportation Committee report and move on in our agenda. Okay, new business. Item A is discussion and possible action on revised attendance area boundaries. We have several attachments here, and I guess I will transition to Rich to share with us what we're looking at.
Unmute here and then mute Joe. There are 4 different documents in this, and this is bringing back information from the May 26th board meeting and the earlier meeting in June. And I'm going to start with, we will eventually get to a possible board action on the boundaries, and that's the action memo, but we're going to start with what's labeled as an information memo. And that is sharing some details on, hold on a second while I pull that one up. The information memo is really giving an overview of Administrative Guideline 5120. And again, we have a board policy 5120 where the district administrator reviews the existing attendance areas and brings recommended changes to the board. And then we have Administrative Guideline 5120 that details how we're going to implement that policy. The initial attendance area boundaries that were approved by the board on May 26th have been amended for recommendation approval by the board to update the boundary between Milton West and Consolidated Elementary Schools. And we'll get into more details on that. The specifics on that are found in the action memo, along with a proposed map and description that's included in board docs. Before we move to that, though, I want to highlight or share with the board some overviews of the changes in the administrative guideline. And we've been working on these changes over the past year to how our 4K through 3rd grade students are assigned to schools for the coming year. We've got some community feedback. Our old system had a lot of problems that we've highlighted in the past, and I won't detail those now. But we heard from many parents that the initial changes that we proposed were also going to cause some considerable concerns to some families. So we spent the past couple of weeks between listening to people at the last board meeting and the listening session, and also meeting with folks and exchanging emails with folks. And we built some of their concerns into a modified compromise plan that addresses many of the concerns that our old plan had with the transfer buses, students arriving late to school, having to get out of school early, considerable cost to the school district on special transportation routes. But also, while meeting many of those needs, the compromise plan also keeps in mind many of the concerns that were raised by parents about the initial changes that we had brought forward. So I want to highlight that while it's important that we have attendance areas in place and boundaries for those areas in place, we also want to note that we're fortunate to have 4 outstanding elementary schools that all do a great job of meeting academic, social, emotional, and physical needs of our youngest learners across the district. And I'm going to highlight some bullet points from that document that Kim has up on the screen. And these are the changes from the original administrative guideline that we had put forward. And again, these aren't coming, the only part of this that's coming to the board for approval is the boundary change, and that'll be in the action memo. But I want the board to be alert to the other changes that we're putting in place. So the boundaries, we're recommending that the board adjust the current school boundary maps to move the North Consolidated boundary between North Consolidated Road and Highway 51 from its current line, which extends off of West Pennycook Road, to now extending off of West Miles Road to North US 51. And again, we'll bring that back as an action item in a minute. The areas from the administrative guideline include a change in how we do the school assignments. And as an overview, while keeping the attendance areas in place for the beginning of the school year with the change that's recommended if the board approves that, we are allowing flexibility for families who'd like to have their child stay at their previous school. Every family will be able to annually request a transfer to a school outside of their attendance area. For example, if a family lives in the East attendance area, they could request a transfer to either Consolidated, Harmony, or Milton West if they live in the East attendance area. These requests will be granted provided there's room at the grade level and parents agree to be responsible for transportation. Placement will be made in the following order with school district of Milton staff at the school requested, classroom demographics, and daycare location being prioritized at each step. A lottery system will be used at each level if there are more requests than spaces available. So the first step would be for district residents who have previously attended the school. They would have the initial priority. Then once those students are placed, district residents who have not previously attended the school would have the next priority. Then non-residents who have previously attended the school, and finally non-residents who have not previously attended the school. So the main things that are changed there from the initial plan that we brought is prioritizing district residents over non-residents. And initially we had said that we would give all school district of Milton staff priority, but we have said it's only staff who are within the school, who work at the school, that they are requesting. So for example, if someone works at Milton West, they can request a transfer of their student to Milton West. If they live outside of the school district, they wouldn't jump ahead of resident families that don't work at West. And if a staff member worked, for instance, at the high school, at Milton High School, they would not have any more priority for placement at one of our elementary schools than anyone else in the school district if the staff member is in the school district, or anyone who's open enrolled if the staff member open enrolls their student. There's some information about daycare transportation there, and we highlighted that already, but we've met with many of the local daycare providers. For the coming year, we're going to provide transportation to multiple schools for a majority of local daycare locations if they fall on a path of travel for our bus routes. Free transportation will be provided for those daycares if the families that are eligible for free transportation. The bias program will be available for transportation for other families. And I want to highlight the next steps that we have coming up. The principals have started already contacting families who have changed school assignment. I think that those phone calls are either completed or very close to being completed. Transfer request forms will be available starting tomorrow morning on our school district website. The main way that people will be allowed to fill that out will be through a Google form. They can do it electronically and send it in. They also, though, if they don't want to do it electronically, can come to the district office or request that we send them a copy of the form. Those forms, whether they're electronic or handwritten, will need to be turned into the school district by 8 a.m. on Monday, June 29th. So families will have until next Monday at 8 a.m. To get those forms turned in. That will be detailed on the forms. Our goal is to have all school assignments communicated to families by July 3rd. So during next week, once we collect those forms, we will dive into placing students who live within the attendance area, and then following our protocol that I just laid out for students who are requesting a transfer, and contacting those, making those assignments and communicating those by the end of the day on July 3rd. And then bias information will be available for online registration in July. So for families that want to take part in bias program we'll have more information coming for them. So before we move to the action item on the change in the school boundaries, are there any questions, comments, thoughts from board members or from anybody else on our admin team who worked on this process?
Yeah, I have several questions. First one, do you know how many students will still not be accommodated for the parents that you've heard from with the change of the maps and things like, with the new changes that you've now updated?
Unmute. Was your question how many students will be able to have
will still not be accommodated?
It's going to depend on the requests that we get. We're anticipating that, especially for in-district students, a vast majority and potentially very close to all families will be able to have their request granted. We don't have, and I don't know, I shouldn't say never because I'm not certain about the history, but we don't have in place now, we haven't for a while had in place enrollment caps at each grade level, specific board approved caps. We've tried to use 24 students in a grade, especially as we get up into the higher elementary, as the most number of students that we have. But that gives us a little bit of flexibility without getting too large in our classes. But when we take our open enrollment students out of the mix and we place our in-district and resident students first, I'm anticipating that all or very near to all of those requests are going to be able to be honored. We can't give assurances for future years at this point because we don't know how many kids will live in the attendance area down the road. And people could move in, or people that currently live in the district could move to a new location. So we are requiring that families request every year for these student transfer requests, but we do give priority to families who have had their child at that school previously too.
So if we don't require open enrollment students to re-request or reopen enroll every year. So I think it's difficult to put that on our families with the uninsurance, the unease of not knowing where their kids are going to be from year to year for the 3 years they're at that school. I think that'd be difficult for them to be able to do that. At least that's my opinion. That maybe we grandfather those families in for this situation right now with all the uncertainties that they talked about at the parent meetings and things like that. I did drive out to the one address with the 2 families on Toco Drive, and to have those grandfathered in, and then anybody new coming in there would be in the West District or whatever. That's why I was just asking what the numbers, how many do we think are not going to be accommodated?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, nearly everyone and possibly everyone will be accommodated for this first year. We talked quite a bit about whether to give people assurances that they'll be able to stay at that school until their child and potentially any siblings would end 3rd grade, and decided that it really puts other families at a disadvantage. Families could move into the attendance area and have to be told that you're gonna have to go to a different school because this family that lives across the district has been promised that they could stay at that school. So long term, it makes more sense as we talk that through to our admin team to have that be an annual process. And it is an annual process for open enrollment families too.
Yeah.
The application's not.
With each building they switch to, right? But not during the 3 years, or if they're at Northside or wherever.
During the elementary, they could be switched from one building to another. They're not guaranteed any more than a resident.
So then I guess the question backs up what you just said. We have a family in our subdivision who was required to go to a different district than their home school because it was full. So to leave that up in the air after the district required them to move to a different school, I don't think that's fair for them to have to be forced to go to a different school when the district required them in the first place to switch schools. So I just think that not knowing is what's tossing everything up in the air for some of the small amount of families that there are.
And I appreciate your thoughts on that and understand your viewpoint on it. In future years, we obviously wouldn't be going through this process at this time in the year too. We would move that process up so that families would have plenty of time to make adjustments if they needed to. Any questions, comments, thoughts from other board members?
Kim, can you just clarify then, when a student does open enroll, do they have to go through that process every year?
No, we do not require students. You can only require a student to reapply for open enrollment to the program once during their K-12 career. Some school districts do require that, for instance, as they're moving into middle school or moving into high school. We have not chosen to do that because we have not had the situation or the need for it necessarily. But the K through 3 students could be moved, if they were placed at East last year, we may have the need to move those open enrolled non-residents to a different building, and that's separate from the open enrollment.
Right. So they're invited into the district or allowed to come into the district, but they're not guaranteed a school.
Correct. That's correct.
Have they been switched a lot over the history?
I'm going to have to ask some of our principals. Have open enrollment students been changed elementary schools over the years?
Yes, they have been, but it's not a frequent occurrence.
Our desire would be that any student that applies is able to be granted that request. And we think as time goes on, there'll be fewer and fewer of those requests because families will be able to make their school choice based on where they live now that we have set boundaries in place. But there is an issue, as I mentioned before, of if we say yes for 3 years from now to families that don't live in that attendance area, that we're going to have extremely large class sizes potentially at some schools and have to come back and readjust our boundaries to move families out of some of those schools because there won't be space for them. So we've based on all of those things, as we talked it through, we landed on that annual process.
And Shelly, your subdivision, there's a few subdivisions, which is exactly why we're tackling this conversation or this project, is at that time, if that did happen where an administration had said, you have to go to this school, what was happening is we had buses that were all going into subdivisions like yours, and it was doable. And now with these, new attendance areas, now all the buses, so at that time, it did probably happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had other circumstances where someone moves. So I'm a first grader, my family moves over to the west side of town, and families choose, for convenience reasons or whatnot, to have their child go, to Milton West. So it is true that students do move partway through that kindergarten through 3rd grade.
Right.
Sometimes you've been asked, sometimes they've asked. So a combination, but in particular, that's part of the reason that most likely did happen.
We do also feel real strongly that it's important that our in-district families get that first option, that they're placed before our open enrollment families. So there may be more cases down the road where open enrollment families may start in a school and at some point not have room no longer be available at that school. Typically that same cohort goes through the grade levels and we'll leave some I don't know what the best way to say it would be. We basically, what I'm trying to say is we want to try to get everyone the ability to attend the school that they would like to, and give everyone the ability to stay at the school if their student has been there. And we'll prioritize in-district people first, and also move, if you will, move open enrollment families to after the in-district people have been placed. Other questions, thoughts, comments on the new guidelines?
I would like to thank the administration for all their hard work on this. Maybe this could have been done better, and I'll take part of the blame for that, because I used to have young kids, and I know that daycare is can be a stressor for families, and I don't think I gave that enough thought last month, but I know that a lot of work has been put into working with these daycares and working with these boundaries, so thanks for doing that. And it's been said, but I think it bears repeating that the kids in our district are very fortunate in that they have 4 fantastic elementary schools to choose from, 3 great principals and 4 fantastic staff. And I think we're very fortunate for that. So I just wanted to mention that.
Are we able to put an amendment in here, or what's the rules of that, how this goes?
And this portion
We're
is,
discussing this right now, right?
yeah, this is just information for the board. This is an administrative guideline, but I appreciate board comments and thoughts. We'll move to the action item on the boundaries after there aren't any more questions or comments from board members on the administrative guideline. Was there anything else that board members had on the AG?
I think another thing to keep in mind, Shelly, is while grandfathering sounds like a good idea, it becomes really complicated, just a hypothetical situation. So if you have a little guy who, let's say, is a first grader who attended a school as a kindergartner at one of the schools, and let's say you have a 3-year-old in your family, and maybe you have a 1-year-old in your family also, at what point does the district stop grandfathering those families? I mean, it becomes really complicated. It wouldn't be complicated if all the kids that were from families were already in schools, but what about the children that are coming up, or children that aren't even born yet? It becomes really complicated. Just a thought.
Before we move to the action item, any other questions, comments? Joe, I don't know if you had anything remotely to add.
I was going to make a comment very similar to Rick. I too would like to thank all of the admin folks that have been working on this. I think most of us can now really appreciate the complexity of this entire issue, and when you start tackling it, it's layered across a lot of things with transportation, with school choice, with daycare, and it's just it's a complicated issue, but I feel like we're moving in the right direction. And I do really want to echo Rich's comments too. I think want to avoid painting ourselves into a corner, if you will use that reference. We can't make commitments 3 years down the road or any number of years down the road, because we don't know what our student demographics look like. And I think we have to be able to adjust year to year based on where our kids live and what our administrative folks think is the best way to get those kids, at the schools that we've got for them. And I would echo what Rick said too. We've got 4 terrific elementary schools. Folks will do well at any of those. So I'll leave it there, and then we will move to the action if there's no more questions.
I agree with what you're saying, but I said by moving that larger subdivision into consolidated, I think the people that have been in that traditional area have gotten left out of the picture for some of them that have that are far out there and far bordering the area. And we put a very populated subdivision, which was spoke about tonight in the last meetings, into an area that's probably going to keep growing. And I'm not sure if that really shows the reflection of the people who have been there for long term.
All right, I want to thank the board for their questions, comments, and thoughts on the administrative guideline. We will move to the action item then, and that's the separate memo. And I'll walk the board through the administration's recommendations. The background information, again, we reviewed the existing attendance areas. We're bringing forward a recommended change to the school board. We've taken input from families and community members, and we're recommending that the board approve a change to the previous 4K through 3 attendance area map that was approved on May 26, 2020. The change will move the area described below from the Milton West attendance area to the consolidated attendance area. I do want to share a little bit about the reasoning behind that recommendation, which is listed both. There's also a map and a description that are listed in board docs that people can refer to. We had a request from some families that live in that area. I know Glenmore Avenue, and there's an area, I believe it's called Old Orchard, that are being moved with this recommended change from the west attendance area into the consolidated attendance area. And they had some compelling reasons for us to do that. Their location is quite close to consolidated school. They have been able to attend consolidated school in the past, and there's a small enough number of people there that we were able to include that without putting the class sizes at consolidated at an unreasonable level. One of the things that we have to be very cautious of because consolidated is a one-section school, meaning one section at each grade level. That doesn't give us as much flexibility as we have at our other schools at Harmony and Milton East and Milton West, which have 2, 3, or even 4 sections at times at different grade levels. So we have to be cautious with that boundary of consolidated, and there's typically going to be some larger groups and smaller groups that come through. So one of our goals was to find a attendance area boundary map that balances those class sizes and provides sustainable class sizes at consolidated. There were questions that were raised about should we include the Harmony Grove neighborhood in the consolidated attendance area, and we looked at that as a possibility, and we ended up with extremely small class sizes at consolidated if we didn't include the Harmony Grove neighborhood. We also looked at possibilities of splitting the Harmony Grove neighborhood up and having some of it go to consolidated and some of it not. As we looked at that as an option, determined that that wasn't a very viable solution because of potential growth there, and still having fairly considerably smaller class sizes at consolidated. To keep the class sizes at consolidated at a sustainable level, we really do need Harmony Grove neighborhood to be part of that attendance area. So the recommendation based on the information that we put together is to make the following change: to move the north boundary for Consolidated Elementary School between North Consolidated Road and Highway 51 from its current line extending to the east off of West Pennycock Road to a new line extending east off of West Miles Road to North Highway 51 is our recommended motion. So we'll open it up to the board to any questions, comments, thoughts that they have.
Where do the Harmony Grove kids go now?
Harmony Grove kids go to all 4 elementary schools this past year. We run buses into Harmony Grove for Consolidated, Harmony, Milton East, and Milton West. That's one of the reasons that we, and there's a lot of reasons why we needed to make a change, but that neighborhood has kind of become a bit of a mix between our 4 different schools.
I think one other thing we can keep in mind is these boundaries are fluid. 2 years from now, things may look different. And depending on where the growth happens, if it happens, I think that the boundary thing is just never going to be a done discussion. It's going to have to get looked at periodically as our district evolves. I mean, I certainly can tell you that the area out here we're talking about, I happen to live out here. I've been here forever. It's changed a lot. It might keep changing. It might not. I guess I can't crystal ball that for you, but I think some folks in the community want hard and fast boundary lines. And while the district has a hard line around the edge, the perimeter, if you will, we do have to have the flexibility in the district to use our resources to the best, level that we can.
Jen and Marcia, this question is for you, and it piggybacks off of what Joe just said. When the boundaries were established, though, they were established so that they wouldn't have to be redone every 2 years. I mean, it was done with forethought, correct? This isn't something because then we're going to be in the same problem we are right now. If you're going to switch the boundaries in 2 years, I mean, I guess it's possible, but I think this was done with the hope that we're not going to change boundaries every 2 years, correct?
Do you want to speak to it?
That is the goal, to
Right.
not have to do that. Correct.
Because seriously, if you change boundaries every 2 years, we're going to be in the same problem every 2 years because families are going to have to keep changing schools, and that's not good for any family.
Yeah, it's really the goal of putting boundaries in place is to get away from the uncertainty from year to year that we've had in place with our previous system. One of the reasons when we were talking about the administrative guideline that we debated putting it in place for allowing the student transfers to take place for a few years, but then eventually cutting it off. And we decided not to for that very reason, because that will allow us to not have to go back and change the boundaries the boundary lines as often. If there's a huge development that comes into somewhere in our district, we may have to revisit our boundary lines. If there's a huge development in our district, we may have to revisit the question that was raised earlier, which I think was a great question about at some point, do we want to add on to consolidated school if we continue to grow out there? And that's a decision for a future board, obviously. But in the short term, we don't want to have to change our boundary lines. We want to keep those boundary lines and allow families the flexibility to request a different school as long as there is space available at that school and the parents will provide transportation. Other questions, comments, thoughts from board members? Joe, were you starting?
Okay, I'm unmuted here. Yeah, I guess like we saw, this is an action item. If anyone is inclined to do that, we don't.
I'll make a motion to approve the recommended change to the 4K3 attendance area boundaries as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Motion from Rick, seconded by Dave, to approve the change to the elementary boundaries relative to the line between West and Consolidated moved in the manner that Rich detailed there in the memo. Are there any other questions? Hearing none, we'll vote that motion. All in favor of that adoption or that change signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? That motion passes. Okay, next new business, item B, is discussion and possible action on reopening district facilities. And Rich, I'll let you you touched on this in your your superintendent update quite a bit, I think. I don't know if there's more questions relative to that, but if you want to just give a quick summary, and then it's an action item if we choose to do that.
I just want to I hit the wrong button. I just want to reinforce that what we're looking at, the plan for this coming school year for the return to school will be brought to the board for approval on July 13th. So the board, we're not asking the board to approve that item. What we are asking the board to approve is the motion that was in the memo that is also included in this agenda item. It's in the reopening district facilities memo, and it's really around our use of facilities for outside groups and our students and staff coming back for summer programming. And the recommended motion is listed in that memo. So we could take any questions or comments if there is a need for more discussion on that, but we did talk about that earlier in agenda item 2A.
I think the discussion on that was comprehensive that we had covered earlier. I would motion to approve phase 2 reopening of all district facilities, including Shilbrook Park, with the proposed guidelines and limitations to include return to summer activity protocol as presented, and give Superintendent Dahman the authority to modify this plan should recommendations from the public health officials change.
I'll second that.
Okay, as you heard, motion from Dave, seconded by Rick, to reopen our district facilities with all the protocols and proper precautions, and give Rich authority to adjust that as conditions warrant. Any questions on that? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed? Thank you. We will roll on here. Change subject matter. Discussion and possible action on the agreement and addendum for the cooperative network, acronym of JEDI, which is our online content that we provide. And I'm guessing Tara is going to give us the update on that.
The most exciting part of the night, right? Yay. Okay. JEDI, as some of you were on the board last year, remember, we added JEDI as our virtual school option, an alternative option for kiddos. It's a K-12 consortium, 16 districts, offers K-12 programming. This past year, we really only offered it to our 9-12 students as a part of kind of our alternative ed package, if you will. So most of our students, well, all of our students for 9-12, we had some options for 7th and 8th and 4 through 6, but didn't have any takers on that. We haven't really advertised it as a option for everyone, because especially this first year, we found out kind of the kids who it works for and the kids who it doesn't. So we're learning more about that as we go, but there's 16 districts in the consortium. This year we had 5 students who went the whole school year successfully, and 14 that did one semester or the other. So 5 the first semester and then decided to go back to school. 9 the second semester who decided that they'd like to try it. We have 6 of our students returning next semester that were really successful with JEDI. I would say that we had 3 more that were pretty successful too, but they chose to come back to the brick and mortar high school. Tried it out, were successful, but don't really want to return to that. So we did, when I presented JEDI for an option last summer, we were keeping withdrawal data, and we had about 12 to 16 kids every year that would either go to homeschool or go to another virtual program. This year we were down to 7, and I would say 2 that JEDI would not have been a viable option for either way. And then 1 who had been at Arise this year is now coming back to us next year to one of our other alternative programs. So I think we've seen a little bit of success there with our kids opting out. We have that as an option so that they don't have to go elsewhere. So any questions with JEDI first?
Okay, it's an option, it's an action item for us here, folks.
Go ahead.
Joe, can you go ahead and speak?
Okay,
There we go.
Can everyone hear me now?
Right.
Okay. To follow up for Tara, then, this is an action item. We need to approve participation in that cooperative.
I move approval of the 660301 agreement and addendum with Boyd Turner, Burlington, Edgerton, Evansville, Fort Atkinson, Jefferson, Lake Mills, Luxembourg, Casco, Marshall, Boston, Milton, Monroe, Stoughton, University of Wisconsin Whitewater for the Cooperative Network JEDI as presented.
Second.
Thank you. Motion from Rick and seconded by Mike. As you just heard, I won't repeat it, but it's for us to stay participating in the JEDI folks there, which I found interesting. I wondered what the JEDI acronym was, and I see in the memo it's Jefferson Eastern Dane Interactive Distance Education Network. So for all inquiring minds. Any questions on that motion? Hearing none, all in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? We are approved. And Tara, we will let you segue to MECAS.
All right, so our MECAS program, of course, we have traditionally had 30 spots. Over the years, the consortium has kind of dwindled to mainly a Milton program. It started out as being something that everybody needed an option. Now most schools have their own in-house options. Edgerton still buys 2 of our seats, and they this past year used those 2 seats. We ended up having about 35 students in the program altogether throughout the school year, but never over 30 at one time. I think within the MECAS program, we've done a lot of adapting and changing to student needs over the years. We still have the very traditional MECAS classroom, which we're sitting in now, that ties in a lot of community service and just an alternative option for kids. But we also have kind of an offshoot of that program that we call Wired, which is a more blended version of high school MECAS online that takes some of our MECAS students into it's a MECAS program within MECAS, but we call it Wired. So MECAS houses those kind of 2 programs now that we can have up to 30 students in. Any questions on MECAS?
Is Clinton and the other schools still buying seats or not?
No, Clinton opted out last year. They have their own in-house programs now too.
Have you thought about bringing that in other districts?
We've only had 1 request, and it was for a specific student last year from another district. We really, we've talked a lot about MECAS just being a Milton program. I mean, I like our relationship with Edgerton. Carrie and I have talked a lot about different options with that. I kind of like those kids getting, you know, the opportunity to be with other students from other districts. And our community service reaches over into that area too. So we definitely would have enough kids to fill the MECAS program on our own. But as of right now, that relationship has still been a strong one. And Edgerton very much wants to stay with us, at least for this next school year. So now it is Milton Edgerton Community Alternative School. So we didn't have to change our acronym. And all of our
I had a chance to sit in on some mock interviews with some MECAS students last year as they were prepping to enter into the world of work, and a lot of them came in that you could tell were ready to go on and do bigger things in life. And I think that's a tribute to, I think is it Mr. Smith, if I recall?
Yeah,
Matt Smith that runs that program, the other folks he had working with him. And so I was fortunate to get a chance to learn a little bit about MECAS. And like I said, I had a chance to meet some kids that I thought were definitely in a position to go on and do good things in their adult lives. And so I'd certainly be comfortable motioning to approve 660301 agreement with Edgerton for the continuation of the Cooperative Alternative School MECAS as presented.
Excellent. Let's see, make sure I'm not muted. Motion from Dave, seconded by Shelly, to continue our MECAS alternative school and the accommodations or opportunities we can offer for those kids. Are there any other questions?
Chair, just a quick question. Only 2 seats for Edgerton. Is that because they only want 2, or we only allow them 2, or how does that work?
Oh, historically, so I think this is my, what did we decide, 6th or 7th year? I think it's my 6th full one. So when I started, I believe they had 3. They chose to go down to 2 at one point, and now would like to have more. However, they use their seats differently. So typically they send special education students. And so for me to give them more spots would mean that we would limit our options for our special education students because of the ratio piece. So we've chosen to not let them have more spots at this point because of that factor.
And,
it would limit our kids.
And they're okay with 2?
They're okay with it.
Okay.
they
might want more, but yeah. Okay.
They really like having that option for their kiddos that have exhausted their alternative options, and typically the kiddos that they send over, it's a good fresh start. So it's been a good relationship.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Our motion on the floor to approve our MECAS arrangement. If there's no more questions, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you, Ms. Huber. That is all on that item. Agenda item E is 2020-2021 new open enrollment applications.
I'll make a motion to approve the recommendations for the 2020-21 new open enrollment applications as presented.
Second.
Okay, motion from Rick, seconded by Mike to approve our open enrollment apps. Are there any questions on those? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you, that passes clearly. And just on time, I saw Mr. Gosjack joining us for an update on the Wellness Committee.
Good evening. So tonight I'm just going to give you a quick update on what the Wellness Committee's been doing. Wellness Committee is comprised of many district parents, community members, staff, members, and members of the district administrative team. We've been really busy over the last year. We are up for our triennial assessment this past year, which we had to have completed by the end of June, and we have accomplished that. We researched and worked on updating the district's wellness policy, which the new version was adopted by the board this past fall. Using the wellness policy assessment tool provided by DPI, we recently assessed the new wellness policy and comparing it to best policy practices. The new policy had a comprehensive score of 70 and a strength score of 40. The old district policy had a comprehensive score of 57 and a strength score of 27. So the committee worked very hard and helped to improve those scores for us. The state average for the comprehensive score is 47 and the strength score is 26. So we did quite well compared to the state average, but there's always room for improvement. This wellness policy report card, which was shared in the board docs, will be up for the public out on our website, hopefully before the end of June here. We also worked with UW Extensions and SSM Health to secure an Action for Healthy Kids grant for East Elementary. Along with this grant came assistance with helping us to take the School Health Index assessment and to guide us in our next steps. The School Health Index is a comprehensive self-assessment which measures the strengths, weaknesses of the district's policies and programs for safety and health. The committee concentrated their efforts on where we scored lower than average and worked long and hard to bring recommendations to the district to help improve programs. This fall, we're hoping to work with Megan Tim from SSM Health and the Healthy Equity Alliance of Rock County to gain input from the Milton community as to what challenges and barriers exist in being healthy and what opportunities are there to make Milton a healthier place to live. Our plans were to do that this spring, but with COVID, unfortunately, we couldn't bring everybody together to do that. I really want to thank all the parents, community members, and Milton staff for their countless hours working on all these projects over the past year. We've made great strides to make Milton community healthier and safer, but we still have work to do, and we're always looking for more members to join us. So if anybody from the board or the community wants to join us, we'd be gladly have you. We're looking to set up another meeting, hopefully this August, so just kind of be on the lookout out there on the website for that. So this is not an action item, but if you have questions, I can attempt to answer them.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. Does anybody have questions about our wellness and health policy? If not, I too would thank you for all of your effort leading that charge and all the folks that have put in all the work on that. It's very much appreciated. Okay, that completes new business. We'll jump to miscellaneous staffing report, as always, which you have included in board docs.
I'll make a motion to approve the staffing reports as presented.
Motion from Rick, seconded by Dave, to approve our staffing reports. Are there any questions? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
And opposed? That motion passes. Staffing report is hired. Is approved.
Joe, if I can just share one thing on this staffing report.
Go ahead.
We did hire a new administrator there. As you know, Matt Peterwolf is leaving the school district at the end of this fiscal year. Tara Zerwinski was hired to replace him as the middle school principal. And we have the first name on the staffing report, Ben Youcher, is going to be our new assistant or associate principal at Milton Middle School. So we are excited to add him to our administrative team.
Very good. I saw Ben is listening, so welcome. We hope to meet in person shortly. Okay, meeting dates. What have you got up your sleeve, Mr. Dahman?
I have a couple upcoming meetings this week that are already scheduled. On Wednesday, the 24th, we have a policy committee meeting at 5:30 p.m. And on Thursday, the 25th, we have a finance committee meeting at 11 a.m. And both of those meetings will be here in the PDC. Our next board meeting is on July 13th. So that's 3 weeks from tonight at 6:30, again here at the PDC. Chris Tukendorf, do we need a HR committee meeting between now and July 13th?
We probably do, but we're gonna have to set that once we have a conversation with Diamond.
I think Diamond shared with me tonight that if we stuck with that Wednesday time frame, that was good with her. So if you want to email her to confirm that, but if you're thinking along that line, I'm thinking that'll work for her, is what she said.
Chris, do you want to follow up on that?
Absolutely.
All right, that sounds good. That was all that we had for upcoming committee meetings between now and July 13th.
Okay.
Yeah, the board meetings in July are the 13th and the 27th.
Okay, that is the end of our open agenda. We have an executive session scheduled. I'm looking for a motion to go into executive session, state statute 1985 sub 1 sub C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. And the subject matter here would be the July 2020 summer school staff compensation.
So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you. Motion from Rick, seconded by Dave, to do as I just mentioned, and we will roll call vote it. And on my screen, Dave is first.
Yes.
Okay, and I will go over to Mike.
Yes.
And Rick.
Yes.
And Shelly.
Yes.
and Joe is a yes. We are in exec session, so please close out and rejoin us.
Joe, for the people who are watching remotely, we may be coming back into open session for a vote, and it shouldn't be a very long executive session. So if people want to stay in here to see the action that the board potentially takes coming back, they certainly can. But all the board members will be closing out of this meeting and then rejoining after the executive session.
Yep, I was going to mention the same thing, so thank you. So see you on the other side, folks.